Well, it's time now for our fourth and final speaker today. Geoff McFetridge is an artist and designer with a vast array of projects under his belt, from books to editorial commissions to international solo exhibitions and collaborations with some of the world's biggest brands. We were particularly taken, by the way, by a recent project which saw Geoff create a series of blinking faces for Apple Watch. Today, he's dialing in from his home in Los Angeles to talk us through a few highlights from his latest show, These Days Are Nameless, at V1 Gallery in Copenhagen. Geoff, please turn on your audio and video so we can say hi.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good.
You had
I'm actually in my daughter's workstation right now at home.
Okay, gotcha.
I've usurped her homeschool workstation.
Okay, because you had like an internet outage about half an hour ago or an hour ago, which
yeah,
was
a planned outage at my studio for no internet, which seems very 2020 in its timing, 5 minutes before our tech test. So.
Exactly. It was a little bit hairy, but I'm very, very pleased we've got you here. Listen, I'm going to hand over to you and you can start sharing your screen and presenting to our audience. Everyone else, again, so we've had some amazing questions today. So if you do have any questions for Geoff, please do put them in the chat and we'll get around to them afterwards. Over to you, Geoff.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my some work from a single painting, actually, that isn't actually in my show, These Days Are Nameless, but really led to the work and was sort of like one of the first sort of pieces of the puzzle that came together to create this sort of body of work. And I thought it was interesting to show, to look deeply into one single, very simple image and kind of show, like, talk about my experience of creating the work, which is something that I try to make the process visible in the work, but it's not always clear. But really, these works. So these are images from, like, installation shots from the show at V1 Gallery in Copenhagen. And this is the only way I've seen these images because I actually didn't go to the show. I'm based in Los Angeles, and I wasn't able to travel, or didn't feel comfortable really traveling at the time, in the middle of the pandemic. So the process, so these works, if you don't know my paintings, but they're these very graphic acrylic paintings on canvas. And I use a process that is very much like a design process that is meant to sort of create a vocabulary of thinking expressed in images. So it's using a design process to, like, reach into the world of sort of poetic thoughts and expressing them with images. So this is an example. So I'm gonna speak to the creation of a single painting, but I would approach almost any project in the same way, whether it was like a painting show, making a single image, doing a project for a client, an identity project, a mural project, marketing project, all the sort of work that I do in my studio all sort of gets sent through the same sort of vice. And it all begins or revolves around drawing. So I think that one of the things I thought was interesting to talk about the creative process was, for me, drawing creates this, like, record. It's like sort of like drawing a map of the thinking that goes into creating a work. And I think it's very much like New spoke of, is that process is so important to creative people. And I think that I've spent many years, like, sort of like blind in the process. Like, I knew what worked, but I think as the years go by and I create work, I start to see the difference, have more control, or more of like a self-understanding of when you're sort of like going into the creative process, of having the moments be more clear and you have more. And I think that one of the interests in sharing this is, like, that clarity, I feel, is so valuable, that you're not just sort of going into a project, not, like, hoping for a revelation. You're sort of like, there's this sort of like control, like this sort of depth to the thinking that is like attainable and repeatable with a sort of a process that have refined over time. So when I start working, everything begins in these large books. So this book is like 12 inches by 14 inches. And it's, all these things are very specific to me. Like I was able to go back and just find the book and find the exact moment I was looking for because they're time-based. Like a single book will have every project I'm working on at the time. And I can go, oh, when I started doing drawings for the painting show. So in the top left corner, you see the words everyday magic. So this was a group show at Blum & Poe that was curated by Bill Powers from Half Gallery. It was called Everyday Magic. The same time I was working on the show for V1 that revolved around the issue of I start with like a theme. The theme was roughly understanding, which is a theme I've been using for about 3 years. So there's this theme of understanding, this theme of human understanding that's like super broad. And then there's everyday magic. So I start sketching and sort of like working through just sort of thinking. And I start from the left and I start going. And in the bottom right, what I wanted to find in this book was this single image that sort of came out of nowhere of a man like laying on the lawn outside at this time when you see a lot of people in Los Angeles, like sitting outside and with his shadow and the color. And then I continued to draw, and these were like other thoughts and these people sort of blobbing and creating, expanding, mixing together. And so it's like creating this like physical sort of using like graphic forms to say that there's like to create a graphic representation of understanding. There was actually like sharing a body, like sharing thinking, coming halfway between two thoughts, two people. Creates like a third being in the center of the frame here. And then I drew the image of the man lying down again, this time facing himself, another version of himself, and wrapped in a shadow. And that was sort of leading to that. That was sort of the moment where I saw something, it sort of like evolve. And this is all done basically just through drawing. And then I wrote the title to the piece, which remained with the title, Portrait on a Three-Sided Page. So then I sort of went back to the original drawing and thought, what was it? Like not understanding what it was in the drawing that I liked, but like knowing there was something happening. And I saw that it was this very abstract version of someone like relaxing, contemplating. And then with this shadow, there's basically an abstracted version of the abstraction that he is sort of staring into, that there is this like sort of void that is like himself. And that sort of gets into another theme that I'm interested in, which is the dialectic. Like two things in opposition that create a third thing or create an understanding of the whole. And it's sort of a durable theme that I see, like, I only came to that, came to understand the dialectic through seeing it in my work, and then it sort of like revealed itself. I don't start with the dialectic and then sort of create work from it. It's like most of the thinking in my work is actually revealed through drawing. So then I went back to the other drawing and I did a color study of the same thing, trying to understand so for me, it's like all of this work, like drawing is about like self-understanding. Like I'm going in and trying to discover what is this drawing revealing to me about my own thinking. So this work, it's like, these are very barely changing, but through the process of these subtle changes, I'm basically having experiences. So this is like the fifth time I've drawn this, I realized that when I draw the first figure and then I draw the second figure, when I'm drawing the second figure, I'm drawing something that I've drawn before, but in reverse. So I've like become the mirror. And what it did was I had this experience of like, I am drawing from a different part of my brain because I'm drawing something backwards. I'm looking at a portrait and drawing a portrait based on that portrait. So it becomes like exactly what I'm looking for in the creative process, which is to move outside of the brief, move out of any sort of intention and enter this sort of unknown. So I've had this like physical experience where the only way to have drawn from that part of my brain was to draw this mirror image. So then I refined it and it became, this is the actual painting. So I refined it and did it a number of times and worked on the color and sort of ended up with this final image, which is this very simple image. But for me, like, was really rewarding because in this image is this first drawing that came out of personal experience. So it's seeing people in Los Angeles in the parks, laying around, trying to find safe public space, but basically getting to the point where things they were doing in their homes or their apartments, they're now doing publicly. They're like laying around and on their phones or whatever on the lawn in parks. And then this reflection. So another thing, so like there was the shadow, but now there's like this reflection. So like the dialectic of this person and the opposite of themselves. And then me drawing in reverse, which I'd kind of never done before. So it was almost like drawing with my left hand. And then the shadow begins to serve this purpose, which is to show that there's these two sides. There's these two things happening in sort of like a magical way, everyday magic. But the shadow announces that these things are happening in the real world. They're happening in a place that has light. There is a sun, there is shadow, and there is matter, there is substance, and they exist in the same place, which I think is sort of an essential thing about magic. Like, you announce that it's magic, it's happening in the real world, it's this sort of illusion, and the shadow serves that purpose. So for me, that's what this image, I never tell anybody what's happening. Like, this painting went into a show, and like sort of like nobody asks. But for me, this is like, the process is like what I take away from any project, any work in a show. It's like, I can take what I sort of got from making this painting, and ideally it's sort of like, it like illuminates something for myself, like a deeper understanding of my own process, or it sort of like makes it worthwhile by making work be a sort of experience. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Geoff. That was, yeah, so interesting to see the kind of process behind one painting like that. Yeah, really, really close detail is great. I can also attest to the fact that I've been to your studio in LA, and I can attest to the fact that, yeah, there are hundreds of these sketchbooks with, about 7 or 8 drawings on each page. It's quite amazing. A few questions for you. I mean, I think, that image that you kind of talked us through there, I think it kind of speaks to a theme, I guess, that comes up a lot in your work, which is there's kind of 2 versions of the same person in 2 states, or kind of maybe at 2 different times, but sharing the same canvas. There's a painting I remember seeing of yours that's 2 women on a bike, but they're kind of looking at each other, or rather on 2 separate bikes. I guess why do you think you come back to that? Yeah, I get that kind of theme over and over again of 2 people in the same canvas.
Yeah, I think I'm interested in, the person on the bike, it was used in some of the promotion for this talk, and it's like a woman on a bike and she's glancing backwards because herself has just passed by. She's thought, wait, I recognize that person. Oh, it's me. But when she looks back, it's actually, she's very abstract. She's just, just like these figures I draw, she's barely shapes. But the person passing by is even more abstract. And I think that's like, I'm using, like, for me, it's like, I don't really know how to separate, but like, the creative process is like, so much of the work is about the creative process, but it's also about experiences in life. So like, I feel like that's like a familiar feeling, like, wait, do I recognize that person? Or, oh, that's my own reflection in the window of the train. These sort of like familiar experiences. And like, can you say that with graphics? Like, is that graphic design? Like, is that like, is sort of like, what is like in my art making, it's sort of like playing with like these like experiences or manipulations of the world, or what we use images for, or images in the world. And for me, I'm really interested in graphic images, but it's sort of like how we see images and experience of images, and how is that like just also the experience of being human. And
absolutely, yeah. One of the things I guess we got from that talk was just showing how long it takes to get to the idea, or even get to the kind of the perfect version of that idea. How long does it then take to kind of make the final piece, I guess? What's the kind of the time split there? You're refining and refining and refining on paper. And then how long is it to kind of get it onto canvas? Is it kind of 5% of the time, do you think?
yeah, I mean, the actual, I mean, all the work I do is like done on paper. It's sort of exploration. And then it's sort of like, it's almost like, it's very akin to like going to press. So it's like, then when I go to paint, there's like, it's a very separate process that, you know, it can vary. Like a painting can take days or they can take weeks, depending. But like, yeah, the one thing I meant to mention was like in the process that there's a moment when I switch over, like you sort of are in this like very like open-minded creative process, like in the books. And then I go to separate pieces of paper, and that becomes like sort of refining things. And then you go to canvas, and that's refining even more. And at a point you sort of switch to like this mechanical creativity where you're just like, it's just mechanical. And that there's like, so it's like you have these different, for me, there, you can say they're like enjoyable, like moments in the process, but they're also like functional. That like, there's a point where you can be like, okay, I'm not like reaching out anymore. I'm like refining. And then what happens? So that's when I was doing the drawing and I drew the reverse of the drawing. And it's like, that was just a purely mechanical thing, but that was essential to like, so it's like my belief in images is you can speak to like complex, poetic, like truths or ideas, and you can speak to them with like mechanical things, like just physically, like how do I get this paint on this canvas, as well as like sort of like super divergent creative thinking. But yeah, the painting in the studio, it feels like, you know, I put on like a mechanic suit and gloves and just like go at it sort of mindlessly, you know.
Right. One final question has just come in from Marley. How do you feel so comfortable articulating your work? Is it from practice, just practice talking about your work? Is it from reading? Is it talking to yourself? Are you writing a lot about your process? Really good question. Like, how do you go about, starting to articulate your work?
I mean, I think it began from being uncomfortable about it. And so I think it's like, I've always been a little bit drawn to like maybe the challenge of things. Like for me, public speaking, like doing a lecture was like, oh, this is like the hardest thing I've ever done. So when I get asked to do it, I'll do it. But then I think that sort of, you know, I think at some point you sort of like go like, okay, there's some challenges and you don't need to take on too many challenges. But like, I think like more succinctly, I was encouraged that when I spoke about work to people, like I realized that that even though someone would say like, I really like that, they didn't know what was in it. So I sort of like realized like, oh, this is in my best interest. You know, people get so much more out of the work when I would explain it. And this is often in a relationship where I'm working for a client, or even just sending something to a gallery or sending something to anybody, and in email, or much better, like speaking about the work. It was like, oh, this is, you know, if I'm going to work so hard on these images, like why not like spend the same amount of work, like working out ways to articulate what is going on in the work, and just actually being clear, like these things are in the work. So it's just like, okay, I should mention this, I did this, and then mention that, you know? So it's not like, I'm not like making stuff up, like, oh, this'll sell, you know, this'll sell this work, or this will make this work seem really smart. It's like just very fundamental, like, oh, I liked this, I did this circle was hand drawn instead of perfectly round for this reason, you know? But it's sort of like, yeah, it's sort of like my work is based on like sort of the gaps in language, that our language is, we don't have the vocabulary to explain some very essential things of being humans. So like I use images for that, but at the same time, language is super useful, that sort of you can, with images, there's sort of these like moments where you're like, actually, can I just say this instead of, you know, just just explain it.
Right. Listen, Geoff, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us. It's been, a pleasure talking to you and a pleasure hearing about that one painting and kind of the whole process behind it.
Thanks for having me.
Not at all. No, thank you. And everyone else, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of tonight's Nicer Tuesdays online and to the end of another year of Nicer Tuesdays. I really hope you've enjoyed it in both physical way back in March and virtual form. Another massive thank you to our event partner, Pinterest, and of course to our wonderful quartet of speakers, Clarice Tudor, Mayan Toledano, Nugote, and Geoff McFetridge there. Finally, thank you all for signing up and joining us this evening and throughout the year. Stay well, stay safe, have a good break if you can, and hopefully see you again in January.